Hey, with your evening story channel, I post new interesting stories every day. Subscribe and click the bell to not miss it. Charles walked out of the office and breathed in the cool, fresh air. He didn't want to go home. He didn't want to go home, as he always had for the last couple of years. He was sick of his wife's constant tantrums and his mother's illness. For 6 months, his mother hadn't left the house. After her microstroke, she'd lost it. Nancy was suffering from constant headaches and weakness, and her blood pressure was rising several times a day. We had to hire a nurse to take care of Mom during the day. Clara, Charles' wife, was working and could not look after her mother-in-law, nor did she want to. Her relationship with Nancy hadn't worked out from the start. Now her daughter-in-law came into her room almost once a month, and her mother hardly ever left her room. Strange, Charles thought. After all, even a year ago, his mother was still baking her specialty cakes, and her girlfriends came to her for tea, and she tended the flowers on the loggia with pleasure. And then there were the constant scandals. Charles, your mom put soda instead of salt in the soup today. Try it, she wants to poison us. I came home from work, and there was a flood in the apartment. She started to put water in the tub and forgot. Charles, your mom burned my nonstick skillet. She just put it on the fire and forgot. She's going to burn down the apartment. How can Charles be so sick of all these complaints? His mom never made excuses. She just looked at her son calmly and sadly with her blue eyes, which had faded with age. Mom, how did it happen? Her son asked her. I have no son. I never pick up that frying pan at all. You know, I love my old cast iron one. But I must have burned my skillet. And now I'm slandering you. And Clara began to sob. The old woman silently went to her room with her shoulders slumped. Charles was desperate. He didn't know what to do. He realized that his mother had given up a lot. She sometimes mixed up dates and forgot what day of the week it was. But on the whole, it seemed to my son that she was in her right mind. He could talk to her, discuss new books. Mom loved to read and even to consult and get sound advice. But lately, these conversations became less and less frequent. Mom was often sad. She would sit all day long and stare out the window. She didn't want to talk or read. She had no appetite either. Charles had to spoon-feed her, but it was hard for him to take care of his mom and work, and there was no time for his wife. Clara complained and scandalized, and over time, the spouses began to distance themselves from each other. Once, when Nancy was at home by herself, she fainted and fell, and so lay on the floor for 3 hours, until Clara did not come from work. The wife immediately called her husband and called an ambulance. She herself could not even lift her mother-in-law. Clara was very frightened. She could not forget about this incident for a long time, and constantly reminded her husband, well, you see, your mother is no longer able to be alone at home, and her health is getting worse and worse, and I proposed to send her to a special institution. There's a very good one I found out. Are you crazy? Charles shouted, though usually he never raised his voice at his wife, but her words angered him to the core. You're suggesting that I give up my own mother, the woman who gave birth to me, raised me alone, and gave me everything I have, to a nursing home. Apparently, Clara was very frightened by her husband's shouting, and so she did not return to such a conversation again. And he made the decision to hire a caregiver. At first, Mom was even happy about it. Oh, how nice it will be even with someone to talk to walk near that house. But the nurse frowned and didn't talk. The village woman doesn't live up to Mom's expectations. She does a great job with her hours, fed her, gave her medication, gave her massages and injections. But there was just nothing to talk to her about. She didn't like to take the woman out for a walk. By that time, Charles had bought a wheelchair for her mother, and the nurse apparently didn't want to take care of her very much. But there was nothing to do because, according to his wife, this woman was the most normal of many other candidates. But even with the arrival of the nurse, their house was not at peace. The mother was also sad and indifferent. She was more and more oblivious, sleepy. Sometimes Charles even began to fear that she would soon not remember him, and his wife was not happy either. But as always, Charles, I can't stand the stranger in the house any longer. I think that nurse smells like a barn. We're all sitting on each other's heads. How much money does it cost? I'll never change my car like that. And what kind of child can we even think about? In these circumstances, the subject of a child had long been a sore point in their family. He and Clara were married for 6 years, married for love. Anyway, he loved her madly. When Clara was in her 3rd year of university, she even won the Institute's beauty contest and immediately won the attention of all the guys. A tall blonde with a trim figure with appetizing forms and big blue eyes. She was the most beautiful girl he had ever met. True, Charles had no complaints about her looks or lack of attention from the opposite sex. But Clara had struck him dead. He pursued her for months, bouquets, restaurants, gifts. Then he began to earn money, and his mother no longer asked for money for entertainment. And finally Clara gave in and they started dating. And after graduation they got married. He brought Clara to live with him. The location allowed. Charles and his mother lived together in a huge 5-room apartment in the center of the capital. The apartment had been inherited from the general's father. At first things were going pretty well. My mother, a candidate of chemical sciences, disappeared all day long at her department. And she spent all of her vacations and weekends in the warm season at her favorite dacha with Clara, and they hardly ever crossed paths or talked to each other. But your mother can't stand me, my wife complained back then. How do you know? The husband shrugged his shoulders and could not understand what had happened between them. Although in fact he also felt that Mom disliked Clara. However, as an intelligent person, she tried not to show it. They had only one conversation shortly before the wedding. Charles, I have a favor to ask of you. Please look closely at Clara and think over your decision once again. You know I've tried never to interfere in your personal life. But now I'm going to give you some advice. Don't get married yet, son. Just try to live together, live together. I hear that from my mother. Charles laughed and hugged his mother. What about propriety? Anyway, it's all settled. Mommy. Clara is a wonderful person, and I don't understand why you don't like her so much. Son, I said what I said, it's up to you. But of course, he and Clara got married. The first year flew by like a honeymoon. And then Clara had an early miscarriage. She was carrying. It's very hard, always a little edgy, ambitious. She couldn't seem to accept that it didn't work out. The usual thing that everyone does. Carry and bear a child. The wife's temper deteriorated and she even changed jobs. She got a job as a realtor at a real estate agency. I need to communicate with people, the wife said. Now her work schedule was irregular. She started working hard and earning good money, and she was beginning to annoy her husband. Charles, why don't you aspire to anything? Our friends bought a house in the countryside, and our neighbors go abroad 3 times a year on vacation. Not like us, just once. Aren't you ashamed? Clara, I make a decent living. Well, certainly as much as you do. I'm a 28-year-old deputy department head. What are you missing? Tell me. He didn't really understand what his wife wanted. Charles asked Clara to have a baby, despite all the arguments and misunderstandings. He continued to love her deeply. Beautiful, intelligent, determined, and a good hostess. Many friends were jealous of what kind of wife he had. Finally, she seemed to agree to have a child. But it didn't work out yet, and my wife said it was because of your mother. She hates me, the way she stares at me with her eyes. She gives me the creeps. And a few times I even found my things in her room. What for? What does she do with them? And yesterday she took our wedding picture and cropped me. Look at this. Charles is shocked. He looked at the mutilated photo. His mommy's mommy, the smartest, kindest person. And here it is. It just didn't make sense. It must have been an insidious disease that took its toll on his mom. She gave birth to Charles late at 43, and now she was in her 70s. Dementia had crept in and changed their lives completely. Charles or Clara is up to no good. Be careful with her son. His mother often had these conversations with her son, and it was another indication to him that her disease was progressing. Charles sighed and got into the car. He still had to go home. After all, the nurse had asked him to leave early for 2 hours today. His wife met him on the doorstep. She was hysterical. "Well, look at this, Charles. Look what she's done." In his wife's hands was a pile of shredded lace underwear. "That's your mother's business." And then she threw these scissors at me. Clara pushed toward her husband an old pair of scissors that were lying on the carpet. I could barely get them away. I was afraid she'd cut herself. "She hates me so much she even cut my underwear. She's dangerous." "Clara, my love, calm down. Please don't cry. I'll think of something. Or we put your mother in a boarding school. Or do I leave? I can't take it anymore." The wife sobbed. "All right, Clara, I'll think about it." "Think fast, Charles. I'll stay at the hotel for a while. I'm afraid to be here." The man went into his mother's room. She was sitting in a chair by the window, hunched over like a little sparrow. "Mom, what did you do?" "Why, Mom?" Mom didn't say anything. "Mom, I'm going to have to find you a boarding house. I'm sorry you live there and I'll visit you. Only there you'll get adequate care and treatment. And I'll come and see you very often." Mom just turned away from him and didn't say anything. Either she didn't understand or she was ashamed of what she had done. Charles didn't understand. His wife kept her word and moved into a hotel. In a few days, she found for her mother-in-law a nice boarding house outside the city. Cozy rooms, a large park around the beautiful doctors, and food. Charles soothed his conscience that his mother would be better there. Perhaps even her health would improve. But the day of departure was still hard, extremely hard for Charles. There was a huge weight on his heart, to be honest. He felt like a scoundrel and a traitor. On the way out of town, he decided to stop by the confectionery and please her with his favorite eclairs. "Mommy, we'll take a whole box of eclairs. What do you treat your new girlfriends today? Come with me. You'll choose them yourself." The old woman suddenly cried, clutching at her son's jacket. "Mom, what's wrong? We agreed on everything." He sat the crying mother down in the stroller, and suddenly something happened that he would never forget. His wife Clara came out of the door of the coffee shop across the street. She and a young jock were laughing and holding hands, and then they kissed on the lips. It was like he'd been hit over the head. "Is Clara here with some strange man? I mean, he called her before he left the house. She said she was at a facility in the suburbs. But there could be no mistake. The couple walked to the car and were still standing there kissing." "Mom, looks like there's been a change of plans. I'm sorry." He quickly put his mom in the back seat, folded and threw the chairs in the trunk, and jumped quickly behind the wheel himself. He did everything as if on automatic. Adrenaline was raging in his blood. He didn't know why he didn't approach Clara at once. He wanted to know where they were going. As stealthily as possible, he followed his wife's red car. Clara didn't seem to notice anything at all. Charles was extremely surprised when he realized that his wife was heading in the direction of their house. He stopped around the corner of the house and didn't go into the yard. He decided to wait about 10 minutes. It was probably the longest 10 minutes of his life. He caught his mom's gaze in the rearview mirror, but she kept looking away, only once looked at him directly and sadly. Finally, Charles went up to the apartment. There was loud music coming from there. He quietly and slowly turned the key in the lock and entered. He peered through the slightly open door of the living room. His brain imprinted the glare of the sun on the parquet, on his grandmother's crystal glasses, on the champagne bottle on the table. Clara and the jock were dancing some sort of tango impersonation in the middle of the room. They hadn't heard him come in. Turning the music down, the jock poured champagne into the glasses. "Who's good, who's good, who's good, who's good?" Clara laughed. "Of course, you're my kitty. I never doubted you for a second. At last I could show you my chambers. I've been sitting here forever. Well, at least the nurse was cooperative. And I taught her to give the old woman sleeping pills during the day so she'd sleep all day. She was a pain in the ass with her lectures. Yes, Clara. And Aita apartment's pretty nice. It's 140 squares and 4-meter ceilings. That's millions. Our millions, our favorite. Enough to cover your debt and all our plans. But it's not ours yet. Grandma's moved out, but she's still alive. And then there's your hubby. Oh, you'd know how much I'm sick of him. I'm sick of his righteousness. I could barely talk him out of that grandma. But don't worry about him. We'll sell this thing with him and the apartment in no time. I'm a realtor for a reason. But the first thing we need to do is declare the old woman incompetent. That won't be a problem. I've already solved almost everything at the boarding house. You're such a good girl, my girl. Charles couldn't listen or watch anymore. The blood rushed to his head, and he flew into the room and punched his lover in the face with furious force. The man flew off to the corner of the room. Charles looked at his wife and her confused, stupid face, which now seemed so ugly as if someone had torn off her mask, and he saw the real face of the snake. So, Scum, he said, cold and steady, you have 1 hour to get out of here with your things. I'll file for divorce myself. We have no children. We'll be divorced in no time. If you come near me or this apartment again, you'll have a problem with the police. They can find out what you gave Mom under the guise of sleeping pills. Without waiting for an answer, Charles turned and walked out of the apartment. Everything was jumbled up in his head, and his world was falling apart. He had betrayed the closest person to him and trusted the real snake. He had traded his own mother for some cheap girl. He realized there was no forgiveness. Is it still possible to restore Mom's health, which, as it turned out, no one was really engaged in? He ran out of the driveway and rushed to the car or the door and fell to his knees in front of his mother, right in the dirt on the pavement. I'm sorry, Mommy, I'm sorry. If you can, Mommy, please. He started sobbing like a little boy, tucked into his mom's lap. Mom, I'm gonna fix you. We have the best doctors overseas. I don't care, but I'm gonna fix you. We'll travel together like we used to dream. Remember, Mom, I love you so much, Mommy. Mom didn't say a word. Did she hear him? Did she understand? And suddenly, he felt his mother's trembling hand slowly and gently stroking his hair.